The text message came through at exactly 9:47 in the morning. I was sitting on the edge of a stained mattress in a roadside motel that charged $29 a night, the kind of place where you could hear trucks rumbling past all night, and the shower only worked if you kicked the pipes just right. My phone buzzed against the chipped nightstand, and when I picked it up, the words on the screen made my blood turn to ice. It was from Declan, my ex-husband. The man I had loved for 12 years. The man I had built a life with. The message read, "I hope the kids forget what you look like soon. Sarah is a real mother. They deserve better than a washed-up criminal." On the television mounted to the wall, the morning news was playing. I looked up just in time to see Declan standing next to Serafina Caldwell, my former best friend, in front of a wall of reporters. They were announcing a multi-billion-dollar merger between Caldwell Industries and Declan's investment firm. They looked radiant. Serafina was wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than I had made in 6 months, and Declan had his arm around her waist like they were royalty. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Power Couple Announces Historic Deal." My hands started shaking. I hurled the phone across the room and it shattered against the wall, pieces of glass and plastic scattering across the threadbare carpet. I had $27 left to my name. But before I tell you how I got here, before I tell you about what happened next, I need you to do something for me. If this story resonates with you, if you have ever felt betrayed, broken, or thrown away like garbage, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel because what I am about to tell you is a story of survival, revenge, and the sweetest justice you can imagine. Drop a comment below and tell me if you have ever had someone you trusted destroy your life. Because trust me, this is a story you will not want to miss. Let me take you back to the beginning. Let me tell you how a woman who once had everything lost it all in a single night, and how she clawed her way back from hell itself. My name is Ava Thorne, and 3 years ago I was living what most people would call the American dream. I was 35 years old, the lead architect at Morrison & Blake, one of the most prestigious architectural firms in Seattle. My office was on the 42nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. On clear days, I would stand at that window with my coffee and watch the ferries cut white trails across the blue water, the Olympic mountains rising like giants in the distance. I had spent 12 years clawing my way up the corporate ladder, working on projects that ranged from sustainable housing developments to cutting-edge tech campuses that made the covers of magazines. Architectural Digest had featured my work twice. Twice. My mother would have been so proud. The Regional Architect of the Year award. That was the prize I had been chasing for months. Everyone at the firm was certain I would win. Edward Morrison, my boss, a man who rarely gave compliments, had pulled me into his office 3 weeks before the gala and said, "Ava, this award has your name on it. Do not screw it up." I had laughed nervously and promised I would not. The award ceremony was scheduled for the annual gala, and I had been preparing my acceptance speech for weeks. I practiced it in my car in the shower in front of my bathroom mirror. This was supposed to be my moment, the culmination of everything I had sacrificed and worked for. Everything I had given up. I lived in a 4-bedroom craftsman house in Queen Anne, one of Seattle's most desirable neighborhoods. The house had a wraparound porch where I used to sit with my morning tea before anyone else woke up, original hardwood floors that creaked in all the right places, and a kitchen I had renovated myself during a 2-week vacation where I barely slept. From the master bedroom window, you could see the Space Needle lit up at night, glowing like a promise. I had 2 children who were my entire world, the reason I worked so hard, the reason I pushed myself to exhaustion. Liam was 8 years old, smart and serious with dark hair like mine, and a love for building things with Lego that reminded me so much of myself at that age. He would spend hours constructing intricate castles and cities, explaining the structural integrity of his designs, with an earnestness that made my heart ache. One night, about 6 months before everything fell apart, Liam had looked up from his latest creation and said, "Mom, when I grow up, I want to build buildings like you, real ones that people can live in." I had knelt down beside him, running my fingers through his hair, and said, "You can build anything you want, sweetheart. Anything at all." He had smiled at me, gap-toothed and innocent, and said, "Will you help me?" I had promised him I would. I believed that promise. Sophie was 6, blonde and bright-eyed like her father, always laughing, always asking questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Where do butterflies sleep? Do dogs dream? She wanted to be a veterinarian when she grew up. She had announced this decision at dinner one night, after we had taken in a stray cat she found in the backyard. Declan had rolled his eyes and said, "Great, another bleeding heart in the family." But Sophie had looked at me with those big blue eyes and said, "Mommy, you save buildings. I want to save animals. Is that okay?" I had reached across the table and squeezed her hand and said, "That is more than okay, baby. That is perfect." I would tuck them into bed every night. I was home, read them stories, kissed their foreheads, and promised them I would always be there to protect them. Always. Liam liked adventure stories about pirates and explorers. Sophie preferred fairy tales about princesses who saved themselves. On the nights when I worked late, which were more frequent than I wanted to admit, I would sneak into their rooms when I got home and watch them sleep, their faces peaceful and trusting. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was building a better future for them. I believed I could keep my promises. God, I was so naive. My husband, Declan Hargrave, was a senior investment manager at Whitmore Capital, a mid-sized firm that specialized in venture capital and private equity. He was the kind of man who walked into a room and changed the temperature, charming, ambitious, with a smile that could sell ice to Eskimos and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Women wanted him. Men wanted to be him. I had wanted him too once upon a time. We met at a mutual friend's dinner party when I was 24, fresh out of grad school and working 80-hour weeks as a junior architect. I had been exhausted that night, ready to make an excuse and leave early, when Declan sat down next to me with 2 glasses of wine and said, "You look like someone who needs rescuing from a boring conversation about stock portfolios." I had laughed, surprised, and said, "Is that what you were talking about?" He had grinned and replied, "God, yes, I was dying. Tell me something interesting instead." So I had told him about the community center I was designing in Georgetown, how I wanted to create spaces that brought people together instead of pushing them apart. He had listened, really listened, his eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, he said, "That is the most passionate thing I have heard anyone say in months. You are going to change the world, Ava. I want to be there when you do." He pursued me relentlessly after that night. Flowers delivered to my tiny studio apartment in Capitol Hill, always sunflowers, because he remembered me mentioning they were my favorite. Notes left on my car windshield with terrible jokes that made me laugh despite myself. He would show up at the coffee shop where I studied for my licensing exam, carrying lattes and pastries from the bakery down the street. Once he drove all the way to Bellingham, where I was meeting with a client, just to take me to dinner. "You are working too hard," he had said. "Let me feed you. Let me take care of you." No one had ever taken care of me before, not since my father died. I fell for him, hard and fast, and completely. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony at my Uncle Silas's cabin in the mountains of Montana. It was intimate, just close friends and family with wildflowers I had picked that morning, and string lights we hung from the pine trees. The sunset that evening turned the sky pink and gold and purple colors I could never quite capture in my designs, no matter how hard I tried. Silas walked me down the makeshift aisle, his calloused hand gripping mine tight. Just before he gave me away, he leaned close and whispered, "Are you sure about this Ava girl I had?" Looked at him confused. "What do you mean?" He had studied my face for a long moment, then shook his head. "Nothing. Just remember what I have always told you. If you ever need help, if things ever go wrong, come find me, no matter what." I had squeezed his hand and whispered back, "I will." "But I will not need to. Declan loves me." Silas had smiled, but it had not reached his eyes. "I hope you are right, sweetheart." I remember thinking that day, as Declan slipped the ring on my finger and kissed me in front of everyone, that I was the luckiest woman alive. I remember thinking I had finally found someone who would stand beside me, not in front of me or behind me, but beside me. I remember thinking I was safe. I was so wrong. Silas Thorne was my only remaining family, the last thread connecting me to my parents, to my childhood, to who I was before I became someone who measured success in square footage and client contracts. My mother had died of breast cancer when I was 12. I remember sitting beside her hospital bed, holding her frail hand, and she had looked at me with those sunken eyes and said, "Promise me something, Ava. Promise me you will never let anyone make you feel small. Promise me you will take up space in this world." I had promised, crying, not understanding then what she meant. I understand now. My father died in a logging accident when I was 19, just 3 months before I started college. The accident happened at a Caldwell Industries lumber mill near our hometown of Missoula, Montana. My father, David Thorne, had been a foreman there for 15 years. He was the kind of man everyone respected, the kind who knew every worker's name and asked about their families, the kind who would not tolerate corners being cut when it came to safety. The official report said a piece of machinery had malfunctioned, causing a massive log to fall and crush him instantly. I remember the sheriff coming to our door, hat in his hands, telling us it had been quick, that he had not suffered. Silas had been there that day. He had looked at the sheriff with hard eyes and said, "Machinery does not just malfunction, Tom. Someone did not do their job." The sheriff had shifted uncomfortably and replied, "It was an accident, Silas. These things happen." Silas had gotten very quiet, very still, in a way that made the air feel dangerous. Then he said, "Get out of my brother's house." The company paid out a small settlement, barely enough to cover the funeral and my first year of tuition at the University of Washington, $25,000. That was what they decided my father's life was worth. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office, 18 years old and orphaned, while some man in an expensive suit slid the check across the table and said, "Caldwell Industries deeply regrets this tragic accident. We hope this helps ease your burden during this difficult time." Silas had been with me. He had stared at that check for a long time, then looked up at the lawyer and said, "You know, it was not an accident, Don, not you." The lawyer's face had gone carefully blank. "I do not know what you mean, Mr. Thorne." Silas had leaned forward, his voice dropping to something cold and lethal. "Yes, you do. And one day I am going to prove it. Mark my words." Silas had been a journalist in his younger years, working for papers in Denver and Portland, the kind of reporter who did not care about making friends or playing it safe. He covered corruption, environmental crime stories that made powerful people nervous. He had won awards for his exposés on illegal dumping, on politicians taking bribes, on corporations poisoning small towns, and then burying the evidence. But after my father died, something in Silas changed. He retired early, walked away from journalism, and moved to a cabin deep in the mountains outside of Kalispell. He said he wanted peace and quiet. He said he was done fighting other people's battles, but I always suspected he was running from something, or maybe toward something. He had become quieter, more watchful, with sharp eyes that seemed to see more than he ever said out loud. I visited him whenever I could, especially after my mother died. The cabin was my refuge, a place where I could breathe, where no one expected anything from me except to exist. Silas taught me how to fish in the creek behind his property, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to be still and quiet and present. He never talked about my father's death unless I brought it up, but sometimes I would catch him staring out the window at the mountains, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. Once when I was in college, I asked him why he left journalism. He had been quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Because I realized that some stories are too dangerous to tell. Some truths get people killed." I had laughed nervously. "That sounds paranoid, Uncle Silas." He had looked at me, his eyes sad and ancient. "I hope you never have to learn that I am right, Ava girl. I really do." He walked me down the aisle at my wedding, and afterward he pulled me aside while everyone else was dancing and drinking and celebrating. He gripped my shoulders, his hands strong despite his age, and looked into my eyes. "Ava, listen to me. If you ever need help, if things ever go wrong, come find me, no matter what. Do not go to the police. Do not trust anyone else. You come to me." Do you understand? I had been confused, a little uncomfortable. "Uncle Silas, what are you talking about?" "Everything is perfect." He had smiled, but it was a smile full of ghosts. "I hope so, sweetheart. God, I hope so, but promise me anyway. Promise me you will come to me if you need help." I had promised mostly to make him feel better, not understanding why he seemed so worried. I laughed it off at the time. I thought he was just being overprotective, an old man who had seen too much darkness and could not help but look for it everywhere. I did not know then that he had been trying to warn me. I did not know he had been trying to save me from what was coming. My best friend Serafina Caldwell had been my maid of honor at that wedding. Sarah. That was what I called her. She had been my person, my sister in everything but blood, the friend you think you will have forever. We met during our freshman year at the University of Washington, assigned as roommates in McCarty Hall, a cramped dorm on the 8th floor that smelled like mildew-stale pizza, and the mistakes of 18-year-olds. She was studying business and I was studying architecture, and we were opposites in almost every way. She was outgoing, confident, effortlessly beautiful, the kind of girl who could walk into a party and everyone would turn to look. I was quiet and tense, always buried in my sketchbooks, the kind of girl who preferred coffee shops to clubs and would rather spend Friday nights designing imaginary buildings than getting drunk. But somehow, impossibly, we clicked. I remember the first real conversation we had. It was 2 a.m, both of us still awake her because she had just gotten back from a party, me, because I was working on a design project that was due the next day. She had stumbled in, kicked off her heels, and collapsed on her bed. Then she said, "Do you ever feel like you are supposed to be someone you are not?" I had looked up from my drafting table surprised. "What do you mean?" She had stared at the ceiling and said, "Everyone expects me to be this perfect Caldwell princess. My father wants me to marry someone important and give him grandchildren. My mother wants me to join the junior league and plan charity galas. But I want to build something myself. I want to matter because of what I do, not because of whose daughter I am." Does that make sense? I had put down my pencil and turned to face her. That makes perfect sense. That is exactly why I am here. I am not building houses for some man. I am building them because I want to create something that lasts longer than I do. She had sat up then, her eyes bright, and said, "We are going to be friends, Ava Thorne. I can tell." And we were. God, we were the best of friends. She introduced me to her world of country club brunches and yacht parties, places where the champagne flowed like water and everyone wore designer clothes like armor. I showed her the dive bars and art galleries. I loved the places where real people talked about real things and no one cared about your last name. She would drag me to her father's company events, and I would drag her to gallery openings in Capitol Hill, where the wine was cheap and the art was strange. We stayed up late talking about our dreams, our fears, our terrible dating experiences. She told me about the pressure she felt from her family, the weight of being a Caldwell. I told her about losing my parents, about feeling alone in a world that kept moving forward while I was stuck in the past. We were there for each other through bad breakfasts and worse breakups, through finals and family drama, and all the messy, beautiful chaos of becoming adults. She came from money, serious money. Her father was Marcus Caldwell, the CEO of Caldwell Industries, a conglomerate with interests in timber, real estate, mining, and a dozen other sectors. The kind of man who had buildings named after him and politicians on speed dial. I met him once at a family dinner Sarah invited me to during our junior year. He was tall, silver-haired, commanding, with eyes that calculated the value of everything they looked at, including me. He had shaken my hand and said, "So you are the architect. Serafina tells me you have grand plans." I had nodded, intimidated, and said, "I want to design buildings that serve communities, that bring people together." He had smiled, but it was the kind of smile that did not reach his eyes. How noble. "And how do you plan to make money doing that?" Before I could answer, Sarah had jumped in. "Daddy, not everyone measures success in dollars. Some people actually care about making a difference." He had laughed, a cold sound. "Everyone measures success in dollars, sweetheart. Some people are just better at pretending they do not." Serafina always said she wanted to make her own way, that she did not want to rely on her father's empire, that she wanted to prove herself on her own terms. She refused to work for Caldwell Industries, even though her father offered her a cushy executive position every time they had dinner. "I do not want his money, and I do not want his name opening doors for me," she told me one night over wine. "I want to know that I earned what I have. I want to look in the mirror and know I did it myself." I admired that about her. I respected her for it. I trusted her completely. She was the first person I called when I got my first major contract. She was the one who held my hand in the delivery room when Liam was born because Declan had been stuck in traffic and did not make it in time. She was Sophie's godmother, the person I trusted with my children's lives. She was my best friend, my sister. I trusted her with everything, every secret, every fear, every dream. I told her things I did not even tell Declan. I told her about the nights I cried because I felt like I was failing as a mother. I told her about the arguments Declan and I had about my working late. I told her about the guilt that gnawed at me every time I missed a school event or a bedtime story. She would listen, pour me more wine, and say, "You are doing amazing, Ava. You are building a career and raising 2 beautiful children. You are not failing. You are superhuman." And I believed her. God help me, I believed every word. After Declan and I got married, life became a careful balancing act. We had Liam a year later and Sophie 2 years after that. I took maternity leave both times, but I was always anxious to get back to work. I loved my children more than anything, but I also loved my career. I had worked so hard to get where I was, and I did not want to lose momentum. Declan seemed supportive at first. He would tell his friends that he was proud to have such an accomplished wife, that he was not one of those old-fashioned men who needed their women to stay home. But as the years went by, small cracks started to appear. He would make comments about how late I stayed at the office. He would sigh heavily when I brought work home on weekends. Once during an argument about missing one of Liam's soccer games, he said, "You know, Ava, most mothers actually want to spend time with their kids." The words stung, but I brushed them off. I told myself he was just stressed that his job was demanding too, that all marriages went through rough patches. Serafina was always around during those years. She was Sophie's godmother, and she treated my children like they were her own. She would come over for dinner at least once a week, bringing expensive wine and desserts from fancy bakeries. She would help me fold laundry while we talked about everything work, drama, relationship problems, our hopes for the future. She told me she was dating someone, a businessman she had met through her father's network, but she was always vague about the details. She said it was complicated, that he traveled a lot, that she was not sure it was going anywhere. I remember telling her she deserved someone who would worship the ground she walked on. She had laughed and said, "Maybe. Or maybe I just need someone who understands ambition." I did not think anything of it at the time. Why would I? She was my best friend. I trusted her with everything. Work consumed me in those years. I was managing multiple projects, simultaneously flying to client meetings in San Francisco and Portland, pulling all-nighters to meet deadlines. One of my biggest projects was the design for a mixed-use development in South Lake Union, a massive complex that would include residential units, office space, and a public park. It was a $10 million contract, and if I pulled it off, it would cement my reputation as one of the top architects in the Pacific Northwest. But the project was also incredibly stressful. The client was demanding constantly changing specifications and pushing back deadlines. My boss at Morrison & Blake, a man named Edward Morrison, was old school and skeptical of my more modern design ideas. He would shoot down my proposals in meetings, question my decisions in front of junior staff, and make me fight for every inch of creative control. But I fought. I always fought. I was not going to let anyone tell me I was not good enough. During this time, Declan's career was also taking off. He had been promoted to senior partner at Whitmore Capital, and he was managing portfolios worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He started traveling more, flying to New York and Los Angeles for meetings with investors. He would be gone for days at a time, and when he came home, he seemed distant. He would spend hours in his home office with the door closed, talking on the phone in a low voice. When I asked him about it, he would say it was just work, that he was dealing with a difficult client that I would not understand because it was too technical. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we were both just working hard to build a future for our family. But deep down, a small voice in the back of my mind was whispering that something was wrong. I ignored it. I was too busy, too tired, too focused on my own problems to pay attention to the warning signs. My uncle Silas died 3 years before everything fell apart. He had been hiking alone in Glacier National Park when he suffered a massive heart attack. A ranger found his body 2 days later. I flew to Montana for the funeral, bringing Declan and the kids with me. The service was small, held at a church in Kalispell with maybe 20 people in attendance. Most of them were old friends of his former journalists and investigators, who spoke about him with a kind of reverence I had not expected. They talked about stories he had broken, corrupt politicians he had exposed, dangerous investigations he had pursued. One man, a grizzled former detective named Tom Brennan, came up to me after the service and said, "Your uncle was one of the good ones. He never stopped looking for the truth, even when it cost him everything." I asked what he meant, but Tom just shook his head and said, "If you ever need anything, you call me." He handed me a card with his phone number on it. I put it in my purse and forgot about it. After the funeral, I went to Silas's cabin to sort through his belongings. Declan stayed at the hotel with the kids, saying he had work calls to make. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it, rustic and cozy, with a wood-burning stove and shelves full of books. But as I started going through his things, I realized there was more to the place than I had known. In a locked closet, I found boxes full of files, newspaper clippings, photographs, and notebooks filled with his handwriting. Most of it seemed to be old case files from his journalism days, but there was one box labeled Caldwell that caught my attention. I opened it and found dozens of documents related to Caldwell Industries. Articles about environmental violations, lawsuits from former employees, financial records that showed suspicious transactions. There was a photo of Marcus Caldwell shaking hands with a man I did not recognize, and written on the back in Silas's handwriting was the word bribery. I did not understand what it all meant, but something about it made me uneasy. I closed the box, locked the closet, and told myself I would come back and deal with it later. I never got the chance. 2 years later, I was at the peak of my career. The South Lake Union project had been completed and was receiving rave reviews. I had been featured in a profile in Seattle Magazine with a photo spread of my designs and an interview where I talked about sustainable architecture and the importance of creating spaces that served communities. My boss, Edward Morrison, had finally come around and was publicly praising my work. And then I received the nomination for Architect of the Year. It was the biggest honor of my career, and I was almost certain I would win. The award ceremony was scheduled for the annual Morrison and Blake Gala, a black tie event held at the Four Seasons downtown. It was a big deal with clients, partners, and industry leaders, all in attendance. I had bought a new dress for the occasion, a navy blue gown that was elegant and understated. I had my acceptance speech written and memorized. I was ready. Declan was supposed to be my date, but on the day of the gala, he called me at 3 p.m. and said he could not make it. He said there was an emergency at work, a deal that was about to fall apart, and he needed to stay at the office to handle it. I was disappointed, but I tried not to let it show. I said, "It is fine, I understand." He said, "You are going to be amazing tonight, Ava. I am proud of you." I told him I loved him and hung up. Serafina had texted me earlier that day, saying she was not feeling well and might not be able to come. I told her to rest and not to worry about it. So I went to the gala alone, telling myself it did not matter that this was my night, and I did not need anyone else there to validate it. The Four Seasons ballroom was stunning with crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, and centerpieces of orchids and roses. I sat at a table near the front with some of my colleagues from the firm, making small talk and sipping champagne. The evening started with a cocktail hour, followed by a dinner of overcooked salmon and rubbery asparagus that everyone pretended to enjoy. Then came the speeches. Edward Morrison took the stage and gave a long-winded talk about the history of the firm and the importance of innovation. Then he started announcing the awards. There were several categories: Rising Star, Best Commercial, Design Lifetime Achievement, and finally Architect of the Year. When he called my name as the winner, the room erupted in applause. I stood up, my heart pounding, and walked toward the stage. The spotlight swung toward me, and I felt a rush of pride and relief. I had done it. I had earned this. But as I reached the steps to the stage, something strange happened. The giant screen behind Edward Morrison, which had been displaying the Morrison and Blake logo, suddenly flickered. At first, I thought it was a technical glitch, but then an image appeared on the screen, grainy security camera footage from what looked like a parking garage. The timestamp in the corner read 2 weeks earlier. I stopped walking. The entire room went silent. People were staring at the screen, confused. And then I saw what they were seeing. The footage showed 2 people pressed up against a black SUV, kissing passionately. The woman had long dark hair and was wearing a red dress I recognized immediately because I had gone shopping with her to pick it out. It was Serafina. And the man she was kissing, the man whose hands were tangled in her hair and whose mouth was on hers, like he could not get enough, was Declan, my husband, the father of my children. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. I felt like I was going to throw up. My legs went weak and I grabbed onto the back of a chair to steady myself. People were turning to look at me, their faces a mix of shock and pity. The video kept playing. It was not just one kiss. They were all over each other, laughing, touching, whispering things I could not hear but could imagine. This was not a mistake. This was not a one-time thing. This was a relationship. And then the screen changed again. More footage, different dates, different locations. Declan and Serafina having dinner at a restaurant I recognized in Pioneer Square. Declan and Serafina walking hand in hand through a park. Declan and Serafina getting into a car together outside of a hotel. How long had this been going on? Months, years. And then before I could process what was happening, Declan walked into the ballroom. He was wearing a tuxedo, perfectly tailored, and he looked calm. Too calm. He walked straight up to the stage, took the microphone from a stunned Edward Morrison, and turned to face the crowd. I was still standing in the middle of the aisle, frozen. He looked directly at me, and there was no guilt in his eyes, no shame, just a cold, calculated confidence that made my blood run cold. He said, "I think we all just saw something that requires an explanation. So here it is. Serafina and I have been in love for 2 years. Ava has been so obsessed with her career, so consumed with being the best architect in Seattle, that she forgot she had a family. She forgot what it means to be a wife. She forgot what it means to be a mother. I tried to make it work. I tried to be patient. But a man has needs. A man deserves a partner who is actually present. Serafina understands that. She understands what it means to put family first. So yes, we are together now. And honestly, this is not a betrayal. This is an upgrade. The words hit me like a physical blow. I could not breathe. I could not think. The room erupted into whispers and gasps. Some people looked horrified. Others looked fascinated like they were watching a reality TV show. And then Serafina walked onto the stage. She was wearing a black cocktail dress and heels, and her makeup was perfect. She did not look sick. She looked radiant. She walked over to Declan and he put his arm around her waist. She looked out at the crowd, and then she looked at me. There was a moment where I thought I saw something in her eyes, a flicker of guilt, a hint of the friend I had known for 15 years. But then it was gone, replaced by something cold and triumphant. She said, "Ava, I am sorry you had to find out this way. But honestly, you have been a terrible friend and a terrible wife. Declan and I are happy, the kids are happy, they love me, they call me Mommy Sarah. Maybe it is time you accepted that you are not as important as you think you are." I do not remember leaving the ballroom. I do not remember walking to my car or driving home. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in my kitchen at 3 in the morning, staring at the wall, my phone buzzing nonstop with calls and texts from people who had been at the gala. I did not answer any of them. I just sat there numb, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Trying to understand how the two people I had trusted most in the world, my husband and my best friend, could destroy me so publicly, so cruelly. And then I thought about what Serafina had said. They call me Mommy Sarah. My children, my babies, were calling another woman Mommy. That thought broke something inside me. I went upstairs to my bedroom, pulled out a suitcase, and started packing a bag for Liam and Sophie. I was going to take them and leave. I was going to get as far away from Declan and Serafina as possible. But when I went to the rooms, they were not there. The beds were empty. I ran downstairs, checked the whole house, but they were gone. I called Declan, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. He answered on the third ring, his voice calm and almost cheerful. He said, "Looking for the kids. Ava, they are with me. They are safe." "Do not worry," I screamed at him, demanding to know where they were, demanding that he bring them home. He laughed. He actually laughed. He said, "They are home, Ava. They are with their real family now. You are not going to see them again unless it is on my terms. If you try to take them, if you cause any trouble, I will make sure you never see them again. Do you understand me?" Then he hung up. I called the police. I told them my husband had taken my children without my permission. But when the officers arrived, they said there was nothing they could do. Declan was the father. He had just as much right to the kids as I did. They said this was a civil matter, a custody issue, and I would need to go through the courts. They left, and I spent the rest of the night sitting on the floor of my children's empty rooms, crying until I had no tears left. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Edward Morrison. It was brief and cold. The firm was terminating my employment effective immediately. The reason given was gross misconduct and violations of company policy. I was stunned. What misconduct? What policy? I called Edward, but he would not take my call. His assistant said he was unavailable and that I should direct all questions to the firm's legal team. I drove to the office, but security would not let me in. They said my access card had been deactivated and that I was no longer an employee. I demanded to speak to someone, anyone but they, threatened to call the police if I did not leave. 2 days later, I received a letter from the firm's attorneys. They were accusing me of corporate espionage. They claimed I had stolen proprietary designs and sold them to a competitor, a firm called Apex Development Group, that had recently won a major contract that Morrison and Blake had been competing for. The letter included what they claimed was evidence emails allegedly sent from my work account to contacts at Apex Financial Records, showing deposits into my bank account that I had never seen before. It was all fabricated. It was all lies. But it did not matter. The accusation alone was enough to destroy my reputation. Within hours, the story was all over industry blogs and social media. Ava Thorne, the once promising architect, was now a thief and a fraud. I hired a lawyer, a tired-looking man named Greg Paulson, who worked out of a cramped office in Ballard. He reviewed the evidence and said it was bad. The emails looked real, the financial records looked real. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to set me up. He said, "Ava, I am going to be honest with you. Proving this is a frame job is going to be very difficult and very expensive. Do you have the resources to fight this?" I looked at my bank account. I had maybe $15,000 in savings. It would not even cover a month of legal fees. I told Greg to do what he could, but I knew it was hopeless. The divorce papers came a week later. Declan was suing for full custody of Liam and Sophie, citing my instability, my alleged criminal activity, and my neglect of the children. His lawyer was Victoria Vance, a shark in a designer suit who had a reputation for destroying people in court. The custody hearing was set for 6 weeks out, and I knew I was walking into a slaughter. Greg Paulson agreed to represent me, but he warned me that the odds were not in my favor. He said, "Victoria Vance does not lose. She is going to come at you with everything she has. You need to be prepared." I tried to prepare. I gathered evidence of my love for my children, photos, videos, school records showing I had been involved in their education. I got character references from neighbors and friends, but most of my friends stopped returning my calls. The story about the corporate espionage had spread, and people did not want to be associated with me. Even my colleagues at Morrison and Blake, people I had worked with for years, ghosted me. I was toxic. I was a pariah. The custody hearing was held in a windowless courtroom in downtown Seattle. Declan showed up with Victoria Vance and Serafina, all three of them dressed like they were going to a business meeting. I sat on the opposite side of the room with Greg, feeling small and powerless. The judge was a stern-looking woman named Margaret Holloway, and she did not seem interested in anything I had to say. Victoria Vance went first. She painted a picture of me as a cold, career-obsessed woman who had neglected her children in favor of her job. She brought up the espionage accusations, implying that I was not just a bad mother, but also a criminal. She brought up the gala incident, describing my alleged outburst, even though I had not said a word that night. She twisted everything. And then Serafina took the stand. She sat there looking poised and sympathetic and lied through her teeth. She said she had known me for 15 years and had watched me slowly deteriorate. She said I was obsessed with my work to the point of ignoring my family. She said I had violent outbursts, that I would yell at Declan in front of the children, that I had once thrown a plate across the kitchen during an argument. None of it was true. She said the children were scared of me, that they had told her they felt safer with their father. She said Liam had nightmares about me. She said Sophie cried every time someone mentioned my name. It was all lies, but the judge was writing everything down. Greg tried to cross-examine her, but Victoria objected to every question, and the judge sustained most of the objections. Declan took the stand next. He played the role of the concerned father perfectly. He said he had tried to make the marriage work, but I had pushed him away. He said he had begged me to spend more time with the family, but I had always chosen work. He said he had started seeing Serafina because he was lonely, because he needed someone who understood what it meant to be present. He said he was not proud of the affair, but it had happened because I had left him no choice. He said the children were thriving now, that they were happy, that they loved Serafina. He said he was worried about what would happen to them if they were forced to spend time with me, given my current mental state and legal troubles. When it was my turn to testify, I tried to tell the truth. I tried to explain that I had been set up, that the espionage charges were false, that I had never neglected my children. But every time I spoke, Victoria Vance would interrupt with an objection or a snide comment. The judge seemed annoyed with me, like I was wasting her time. After 2 hours of testimony, the judge called a recess. When we came back, she delivered her ruling. Declan was awarded primary physical custody. I was granted supervised visitation once a month, 2 hours at a time, at a facility approved by the court. The judge said her decision was based on the best interests of the children, and given my current circumstances, she did not feel comfortable granting me more access. I sat there stunned as the words washed over me. I had lost my children. The financial ruin came next. Our house was sold to cover legal fees and debts. The proceeds were split, but Declan's share was significantly larger because his lawyer had argued that I owed him damages for emotional distress. My bank accounts were frozen pending the resolution of the corporate espionage case, which meant I had no access to my own money. I was evicted from the house 2 weeks after the custody ruling. I packed what I could fit in my car, mostly clothes and a few personal items, and left. I had nowhere to go. I ended up at a motel on Aurora Avenue, a depressing place with stained carpets and a front desk clerk who barely looked up when I checked in. I paid for a week in advance with the last of my cash. I had $27 left. For the first few weeks, I barely functioned. I stayed in that motel room staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. How had this happened? How had I lost everything so quickly? I thought about ending it. I thought about walking into the Puget Sound and not coming back. But then I would think about Liam and Sophie, and I knew I could not give up. Not yet. I had to find a way to fight back. I just did not know how. One afternoon, about a month after I had moved into the motel, I was going through the last of my belongings. There was a box of things from my mother's house that I had kept in storage for years. I had not opened it since she died. Inside were old photo albums, some of her jewelry, and a few papers. At the bottom of the box, I found an envelope with my name on it. The handwriting was my Uncle Silas's. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a letter, a key, and a thick stack of $100 bills. I counted the money. $100,000. The letter read, Ava, if you are reading this, it means the wolves have torn you apart. But do not be afraid. Wolves can only be hunted with traps. Your father's death was not an accident. The Caldwells killed him. They have been circling your family for decades, waiting for the right moment to strike. Inside this envelope is a seed. You need to find the forest. The key is for a safety deposit box at First National Bank in Spokane. Box number 417. Inside you will find what you need to understand. But the real treasure is at the cabin. Go to these coordinates. Everything you need is there. Do not trust anyone. Do not go to the police. They are all bought and paid for. You are stronger than you know, Ava. Your father would be proud of you. Now go make them pay. The letter was dated 2 weeks before Silas died. I stared at the letter for a long time, trying to process what it meant. The Caldwells killed my father. It did not make sense. My father had died in an accident at a lumber mill, but why would Silas lie? And what did he mean by everything you need is at the cabin? I looked at the coordinates he had written at the bottom of the letter. They pointed to a location in northwestern Montana near Glacier National Park. It was at least an 8-hour drive from Seattle. I used some of the cash to buy a cheap used car from a lot on Pacific Highway, a beat-up Honda with 200,000 miles on it, but an engine that still ran. I loaded my belongings into the back seat and started driving east. I did not tell anyone where I was going. I did not have anyone to tell. The drive was long and exhausting. I stopped at gas stations and diners along the way, eating truck stop food and sleeping in the car, when I got too tired to keep going. Somewhere around Spokane, I noticed a black pickup truck that seemed to be following me. I changed lanes. It changed lanes. I sped up. It sped up. My heart started racing. Was I being paranoid? Or was someone actually following me? I decided to test it. I took an exit off the highway, a random one, that led to a small town I had never heard of. The truck followed. I drove through the town making random turns trying to lose it, but it stayed on my tail. Finally, I pulled into a grocery store parking lot, got out of the car, and walked inside. I pretended to shop, keeping an eye on the entrance. After about 10 minutes, I saw a man walk in. He was tall, muscular, with a shaved head and a cold expression. He did not buy anything. He just walked around the store watching me. I left through a back exit, ran to my car, and sped out of the parking lot. The truck followed. I got back on the highway, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. The truck stayed behind me for another hour, and then on a narrow stretch of mountain road, with a steep drop on one side, it sped up. I saw it coming in my rearview mirror, barreling toward me. I pressed harder on the gas, but the Honda was old and slow. The truck pulled up beside me, and then it swerved. It was trying to push me off the road. I could see the cliff edge just a few feet away. I slammed on the brakes as hard as I could. The truck shot past me, its tires screeching. I swerved onto the shoulder, my car sliding dangerously close to the edge. For a moment, I thought I was going to go over, but the car stopped, dust and gravel flying up around me. The truck kept going, disappearing around a curve. I sat there shaking, trying to catch my breath. Someone had just tried to kill me. The Caldwells knew I was still alive, and they were not going to let me stay that way. I waited until my hands stopped shaking, and then I kept driving. I did not stop again until I reached the coordinates Silas had given me. It was late afternoon when I finally found the cabin. It was deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that was barely visible from the highway. The cabin looked the same as I remembered, a small log structure with a stone chimney and a covered porch. But when I stepped inside, I realized it was not just a cabin. It was something else entirely. The main room had been transformed into a kind of command center. The walls were covered with maps, photographs, and documents. There were strings of red yarn connecting different pieces of information like something out of a detective movie. In the center of the room was a large desk with an old desktop computer and several monitors. There were filing cabinets lining one wall, each drawer labeled with names: Caldwell, Morrison, Vance, Whitmore Capital. My heart started pounding. What had Silas been doing up here? I started going through the files. It was overwhelming. There were decades' worth of documents, investigative notes, financial records, audio recordings, and photographs. Silas had been building a case against the Caldwells for 30 years. I learned that Marcus Caldwell had not built his empire through hard work and innovation. He had built it through corruption, bribery, and violence. There were records of illegal logging operations, environmental violations that had been covered up, lawsuits from former employees that had been settled quietly. There were photos of Marcus with judges, politicians, and police chiefs, all of them smiling and shaking hands. And there were notes about people who had crossed Marcus, people who had ended up dead or ruined. One file was labeled David Thorne, my father. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside were copies of accident reports, witness statements, and insurance documents. But there was also something else. A video file on a USB drive. I plugged it into the computer and hit play. The video showed an old man lying in a hospital bed. He looked frail and sick, hooked up to an IV and a heart monitor. The camera was shaky, like someone was holding a phone. A voice off camera, Silas's voice, said, "State your name for the record." The old man coughed and said, "Robert Finch." Silas asked, "Can you tell me what happened on June 14, 1994? Robert Finch closed his eyes, and for a moment, I thought he was going to refuse to answer. But then he started talking. He said he had worked at the Caldwell Industries lumber mill for 22 years. He said he was a maintenance worker responsible for keeping the machinery running. He said that in early June of 1994, Marcus Caldwell had called him into his office. Marcus had told him that there was a man working at the mill, a foreman named David Thorne, who was causing problems. David had been asking questions about illegal logging on protected land. He had been talking to other workers about filing a complaint with the EPA. Marcus could not have that. So Marcus offered Robert $10,000 to sabotage one of the machines. Make it look like an accident. Make sure David Thorne does not walk out of that mill alive. Robert said he needed the money. His wife was dying of cancer, and they did not have insurance, so he agreed. On June 14th, he loosened the bolts on a pulley system that controlled the movement of logs. When David Thorne walked under it that afternoon, the pulley gave way. A massive log fell and crushed him instantly. Robert said he had been living with the guilt ever since. He said he was dying now to lung cancer, and he wanted to confess before he met his maker. The video ended. I sat there staring at the blank screen, tears streaming down my face. My father had been murdered. He had been killed because he tried to do the right thing. And Marcus Caldwell had gotten away with it for 30 years. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break something, but instead I kept digging. There were more files. A folder labeled Serafina. Inside were audio recordings, dozens of them conversations between Marcus and Serafina that had been secretly recorded over the years. I started listening. In one recording, Marcus was talking to Serafina about me. He said the Thorne family still holds the mineral rights to that land in Montana. If we can get those rights, we will have access to one of the richest rare earth mineral deposits in North America. It is worth billions. But David's brother Silas knows too much, and the niece Ava, she inherited everything. We need to neutralize her. Serafina's voice, younger and eager, said, "How do you want me to do that, Daddy?" Marcus said, "Get close to her. Become her friend. Find out everything about her. And when the time is right, we will take everything she has." Another recording, one more recent. Marcus said, "The husband is the key. Declan Hargrave is ambitious and weak. Seduce him. Make him fall in love with you. Once you have him, you have leverage over Ava. We will destroy her reputation, take her children, and force her to sign over the mineral rights. She will be desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. Serafina laughed and said, "This is going to be fun." There were more conversations between Serafina and Declan, planning their affair, discussing how to manipulate me, how to turn my colleagues against me, how to plant evidence to make me look like a criminal. Everything, every betrayal, every moment of pain had been orchestrated by the Caldwells. This was not just an affair. This was a calculated plan to destroy me and steal my family's land. I spent the next 3 days at the cabin going through everything, making copies, taking notes. I learned that Victoria Vance was on the Caldwell payroll, had been for years. She had represented Marcus in dozens of lawsuits, and she had a history of using dirty tactics to win. I learned that Edward Morrison, my former boss, had taken bribes from Caldwell Industries in exchange for access to proprietary designs from Morrison and Blake. The espionage accusation against me was not just a frame job. It was part of a larger scheme to steal intellectual property and funnel it to Caldwell-owned companies. I learned that Declan's firm, Whitmore Capital, was being used to launder money for Marcus. Declan had gotten involved with the Caldwells years ago, and by the time he met Serafina, he was in too deep to get out. But the most important thing I found was evidence that could bring them all down. Silas had been meticulous. He had video confessions, audio recordings, financial records, emails, everything needed to prove that Marcus Caldwell and his associates had committed murder, fraud, bribery, and racketeering. And he had been preparing to take it to the authorities when he died. I did not believe his death had been a heart attack. I believed he had been killed just like my father, but he had left me everything I needed to finish what he started. I knew I could not do this alone. I needed help. I remembered the card Tom Brennan had given me at Silas's funeral. I found it in my wallet, pulled out my phone, and called the number. Tom answered on the second ring. I told him who I was and where I was. I told him what I had found. There was a long pause, and then Tom said, "Jesus Christ." Silas always said someone would come for this eventually. Stay where you are. I am going to make some calls. 2 days later, Tom showed up at the cabin with a man named Jack Riley. Jack Riley was not what I expected. He was in his late 50s with gray hair, sharp blue eyes, and a face that looked like it had been through a war. He was wearing jeans and a leather jacket, and he moved with the kind of confidence that came from years of experience. Tom introduced him and said Jack used to be a detective with the Seattle PD. He has been investigating the Caldwells for a decade. If anyone can help you, it is him. Jack looked around the cabin, taking in the walls covered with evidence, and said, "Your uncle was a hell of an investigator. This is more than I have been able to gather in 10 years. He looked at me and said, "If you want to take these people down, I will help you, but you need to understand what you are getting into. The Caldwells are dangerous. They have money, power, and connections. If we go after them, they will come after us. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about my father. I thought about Silas. I thought about my children calling another woman mommy. I looked Jack in the eye and said, "They already took everything from me. I have nothing left to lose." Jack smiled a grim smile and said, "Good. Then let us get to work." Jack explained that we could not go to the local authorities. Too many of them were on the Caldwell payroll. We needed to bring in federal prosecutors, people who were not connected to Marcus. Jack had a contact, a woman named Angela Reeves, who worked as an assistant U.S. attorney in the Eastern District of Washington. She was known for taking on corruption cases, and she had a reputation for being incorruptible. Jack reached out to her, and we set up a meeting. Angela drove up to the cabin a week later. She was a sharp woman in her 40s, with short, dark hair and an intense gaze. She spent an entire day going through the evidence, asking questions, taking notes. When she was done, she looked at me and said, "This is one of the most comprehensive cases I have ever seen. If even half of this holds up in court, we can take down Marcus Caldwell, his entire organization, and everyone connected to them. But it is going to take time. We need to verify everything, build an airtight case. I need you to be patient." Patience was not something I had a lot of, but I understood. In the meantime, Jack and I started working on a parallel strategy. We needed to expose the Caldwells publicly, not just legally. Jack had a contact at the New York Times, a journalist named Sarah Chen, who specialized in investigative reporting. Jack reached out to Sarah and pitched her the story. She was interested but cautious. She said she needed to verify the sources, corroborate the claims, and build a narrative that would hold up under scrutiny. She said it would take at least a month. Jack and I gave her access to some of the files, the ones about financial crimes, corruption, and bribery. We held back the evidence about my father's murder and the plan to destroy me. We wanted to save that for the final blow. While Angela and Sarah were working their angles, Jack and I started gathering additional evidence. We tracked down former employees of Caldwell Industries who had been wronged by Marcus. Some of them were willing to talk. Others were too scared. We found witnesses who could testify about illegal activities. We built a timeline of every crime the Caldwells had committed over the past 30 years, and we prepared for the inevitable backlash. The Caldwells did not stay quiet. About 3 weeks after I arrived at the cabin, Jack's office in Seattle was broken into. Nothing was stolen, but the place was trashed. Someone had spray-painted a message on the wall, "Back off or die." Jack called me and said, "They know we are coming for them. We need to be careful." A few days later, I was in town buying groceries when I noticed the same black pickup truck that had followed me before. It was parked across the street, the driver watching me. I got back to the cabin as quickly as I could and told Jack. He said, "They are trying to intimidate you. Do not let them." But the intimidation turned into something worse. One night I was walking back to the cabin from the nearby creek where I had been getting water. It was dark and I was carrying a flashlight. I heard a noise behind me and turned around. 2 men were walking toward me, their faces covered with bandanas. One of them said, "You should have taken the money, lady. Now you are going to pay." They lunged at me. I dropped the flashlight and ran. I could hear them behind me crashing through the underbrush. I was fast, but they were faster. One of them grabbed my arm and yanked me back. I fell to the ground and he was on top of me, his hands around my throat. I could not breathe. I clawed at his face, trying to get him off, but he was too strong. And then I heard a gunshot. The man on top of me froze. Another gunshot. He let go of me and scrambled to his feet. Both men ran off into the darkness. I rolled over, gasping for air, and saw Jack standing a few feet away with a pistol in his hand. He helped me up and said, "Are you okay?" I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. Jack said, "You are not staying alone anymore. You are moving in with me. From now on, we do not go anywhere without backup." I did not argue. We moved into a safe house Jack had set up outside of Kalispell, a small cabin that belonged to a friend of his. We kept working, but we were always looking over our shoulders. The danger was real and it was escalating, but so was our resolve. We were going to take the Caldwells down no matter what it cost. About 6 weeks after I found the cabin, Angela Reeves called with good news. She said, "We have enough to move forward. I am filing charges against Marcus Caldwell, Declan Hargrave, Serafina Caldwell, Victoria Vance, and several others. But I need to time this carefully. If we move too soon, they will use their connections to shut us down. I need you to trust me." I told her I did. At the same time, Sarah Chen finished her article. She sent us a draft, and it was devastating. The headline read, "The Caldwell Empire, Built on Blood, Lies, and Crime." The article detailed decades of corruption, illegal activities, and the web of bribes and cover-ups that had allowed Marcus Caldwell to build his fortune. Sarah had corroborated everything with multiple sources, and the article was set to be published in 3 days. Jack and I realized we had a perfect opportunity. Caldwell Industries was about to go public. The IPO launch event was scheduled for a Friday night at the Columbia Tower Club, one of the most exclusive venues in Seattle. It was going to be a massive celebration with investors, politicians, and business leaders all in attendance. Marcus would be there, Declan would be there, Serafina would be there, and we were going to ruin them. Jack and I finalized the plan. Sarah's article would drop at exactly 9 o'clock that night, just as the event was getting into full swing. At the same time, Angela and her team of federal agents would move in to make arrests, and I would be there to confront them face to face. The night of the IPO launch, I put on the red dress I had bought with the last of Silas's money. It was bold and powerful, the kind of dress that demanded attention. Jack drove me to Seattle, and we went over the plan one more time. Angela's team was on standby. Sarah's article was locked and loaded. Everything was ready. Jack looked at me and said, "This is it. Once we do this, there is no going back." "Are you sure?" I looked at him and said, "I have never been more sure of anything." The Columbia Tower Club was stunning. The ballroom was on the 76th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering lights of Seattle. The room was filled with the city's elite, all dressed in their finest, drinking champagne and congratulating each other on their brilliance. Declan and Serafina were at the center of it all, smiling and shaking hands like they owned the world. Marcus Caldwell was on stage, giving a speech about vision and the future and the American dream. It was sickening. I stood near the back of the room, hidden among the crowd waiting. At exactly 9 o'clock, the first phone buzzed. Then another, then dozens. People pulled out their phones, their expressions changing from confusion to shock. The New York Times article had just dropped. People were reading it, their faces going pale. The whispers turned into gasps. Someone pointed at Marcus on stage and said, "Is this true?" The stock ticker on the screen behind Marcus, which had been showing Caldwell Industries climbing, suddenly plummeted. The numbers were dropping so fast it looked like a glitch. Marcus stopped talking mid-sentence. He looked out at the crowd, confused. Someone yelled, "You are a murderer." The room erupted into chaos. And that was my cue. I walked into the ballroom, every head turning toward me. I was not the broken woman they had destroyed. I was something else now. I was vengeance. I walked up to the stage, my heels clicking on the marble floor. Marcus stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. Declan's face went white. Serafina's mouth dropped open. I pulled out a tablet and connected it to the screen behind Marcus. The room went silent. I played the video, Robert Finch's confession. The entire room watched as the dying man described how Marcus Caldwell had paid him to murder my father. When the video ended, the room was deathly quiet. Marcus tried to speak, but no words came out. I looked at him and said, "You killed my father. You destroyed my life. You thought you could erase me. But you forgot one thing. Thorns do not break. We sharpen." Serafina screamed and ran at me. "You ruined everything. You destroyed us." I looked at her calmly and said, "No, Serafina, you built your castle on a grave. I just came to carve the names on the headstone." And then the doors burst open. Angela Reeves walked in with a team of federal agents. She read out the charges: murder, racketeering, bribery, fraud, conspiracy. The list went on and on. Marcus clutched his chest, his face turning purple. He staggered and then he collapsed onto the stage. People screamed. Paramedics rushed in, but it was too late. He was dead before they got him on a stretcher. Declan was arrested on the spot. Serafina tried to run, but the agents caught her before she made it to the elevator. She was crying, begging, saying she did not know that her father had made her do it. But no one was listening. Victoria Vance was arrested at her home that same night. The entire empire collapsed in a matter of hours. The trials took almost a year. Declan was convicted of conspiracy fraud and being an accessory to multiple crimes. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Serafina agreed to testify against the remaining members of the organization in exchange for a reduced sentence. She got 15 years, but she lost everything: her reputation, her freedom, her future. The judge made it clear that her cooperation did not erase her guilt. All the assets of Caldwell Industries were seized and liquidated. Victims of the company's crimes, including my family, were awarded restitution. I was granted full ownership of the mineral rights to my family's land in Montana, valued at over $3 billion. The custody case was reopened. With Declan in prison and Serafina discredited, I was awarded full custody of Liam and Sophie. The first time I saw them after everything was over, they ran into my arms and held on like they would never let go. Liam said, "I knew you would come back, Mom. I knew you would save us." Sophie just cried and cried. It was the best moment of my life. I did not keep all the money. I used a large portion of it to establish the Thorn Justice Fund, named after my father and my uncle. The fund provides legal support and resources to individuals and families who are being exploited or destroyed by powerful corporations. Jack Riley became the fund's lead investigator. He said it was the best job he ever had. A few years later, I am standing in the backyard of a house I built myself. A cozy, warm place in the mountains of Montana, not far from where my uncle's cabin still stands. Liam is teaching Sophie how to throw a baseball, and she is laughing so hard she can barely catch her breath. Jack is sitting on the porch with a beer telling stories about the old days. I watch my children play, and I feel something I had not felt in years: peace. The storm is over. I did not just survive, I won. I turned the ashes of my past into fertile ground for a brighter future. So let me ask you this. Have you ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most? Have you ever felt like the world was against you, like there was no way out? If you have, I want you to know that you are stronger than you think. You are capable of more than you know. Do not let anyone make you feel small. Do not let anyone take what is yours. Fight back, rebuild, and when you win, make sure the world knows your name. If this story inspired you, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment below telling me your story. Because we all have the power to rise from the ashes. We just have to be brave enough to light the match.